we have everything we need. We know that we have the technologies, we know it needs to be done. We even have the political will, but still it's not happening. And so it comes really to me, I think it's a structural issue. It's the way that we do everything. You can't make change. That's what we're doing. And it's the manager of new growth ideas is vacant. And that's where we're at. We're all hoping that somebody's got that, but they don't. And so what I think is really interesting is that we are superorganisms, and I think I have not made it clear enough to people how that it is a fundamental difference between other organisms. And so we're operating in this paradigm of, even when we try to do nature-based thinking, we're thinking of ourselves as the same as other organisms, so like bears, and we compete, and survival of the fittest, and that's happening. But superorganisms are fundamentally different because we share our reproductive success at one level or another. So selection is operating at every scale all the time, but often in different directions. So it's when it happens in your body, right? Like you have all these cells doing different tasks, and they're all supporting you and helping you reproduce. And that's what a superorganism is doing as well. Like all those other cells are supporting your reproduction. And that's what the superorganisms are doing. And so like that is like, ooh, an ant. I guess ants are like that and honeybees are like that, but it's harder for us to think of ourselves doing that. Especially because of the way that our society is organized, so under competition, and we're competing for different pay scales, and everything we do is about ourselves and our families, right? But that's not how we evolve. Because superorganisms are these amoeba-like societies of independently perceptive and creative individuals, but they fundamentally depend on one another to launch the next generation. We do it collectively. Not all of us are breeders. Not all of us, we've got menopausal grandmothers. We've got, not everybody is contributing in that way that other species do. Like when they get old and non-reproductive, they just die. There's no point. And so selection hasn't operated on that. And yet, but for us, or for whales, or for elephants, we have these grandmothers, we have these extended networks. Not everybody's reproducing. It's because we need to help each other to reproduce the next generation. So it's a fundamental difference. And we're sharing those costs and benefits in a way that very few organisms do. I mean, we got ants, we got honeybees, we have some weird shrimp, we've got naked mole rats. There's not that many species that do it, but we are one of them. And so what it enables you to do is that different individuals can take on different roles. And so it expands the capacity and the capabilities of the entire community. And the same way that it does for your body, you've got cells that are doing this and cells that are doing this, and all together it makes you. And it's the same thing. So, but where the cells in your body are attached clones, they're not, as far as we know, roaming off at night to get up to no good. Well, some of them might, but
you never can tell.
You never can tell. But where members of a superorganism are diverse and independent. And so it's quite a different thing there. So what I wanted to show you is this is like a general pattern that I found for all organisms. And so this is kind of, I'm a scientist, so I've always been schooled in analytical. Like we take it apart, we analyze all the components, but I came up against a wall where I couldn't describe the things that I'm trying to describe in that way. So I have supplemented that with synthesis of patterns, looking for patterns in the world and trying to generalize them. And that's not something they teach us to do at school, to look for those kind of patterns. But indigenous people always did, right? So it is in our biology to do this. So organisms have an essential nature, which is, they're serving their reproductive purpose. They have to feed on something. So they have a niche, they have a certain way of making a living. And the way they do that is through these operational things that they do, their growth and their development, their reproduction, their adaptations. And all of that together feeds a role. It feeds other organisms. And if you look at this relationship, these systems between the niche and the role, you find that they have to feed each other. And that can be very indirect. What you eat can go through all kinds of different organisms and energy systems, but eventually it does feed the thing that feeds you. So this is a general pattern for organisms. So here is the same pattern that we see for superorganism species. So first off, we have a decentralized identity. There's a bunch of us that make up the colony, but only the queen or only, a select bunch of organisms are actually doing the reproduction, but we all are part of it. And so what happens is we go out, and this is true for like ants, honeybees, even mycelial fungus underground, and even slime molds. So they're going out as individuals and they're finding these small particulate raw resources. And then different individuals take on different roles. So that's going up into the swarm creativity. And then this collective intelligence is where we each have our own perspectives and we each have our own thresholds of activity. So what happens is the queen, she starts her little colony. She'll have eggs and eat those eggs to get the strength to make the next generation of workers. And then they eat her eggs and so it's like that. And then when the colony is mature, you get this, real differentiation and real specialization, and you can reproduce the colony, and that's the continuum of your life. So this is a general pattern. So what they do, the superorganisms, they collect these raw resources. Different individuals are doing different parts of it. They rely on different perspectives and diverse personalities and talents and skills to do that. And then what happens is they bring all those particles together and they partner with other organisms to upcycle it. So it's a symbiotic relationship that upcycles the value. And then other parasites, symbionts, other organisms are attracted to that bonanza, and they break it down and return it to the territory. So these territories get richer and richer and richer. And that's a superorganism pattern that we see. So this is their behavioral ecology, right? It's these minds going out, finding little specks, and then upcycling it with other organisms, and then returning it to that place. And that's how the territories grow richer. They make these relationships, and it's worth defending, right? It's like they put a lot of investment into these places, which is why hornets come after you and bees come after you, and Ukrainians protect themselves. So here you go. Here's a superorganism. It's a bounded and protected community of diverse and independent individuals that share an identity and purpose and are growing collective value in a common nexus of trusted relationships. So that's a general pattern for all superorganisms, and that includes us. So it's interesting to compare that against the way we actually live. Chimpanzees are very they're super clever. They care about each other. They have a lot of the same traits that we have. But what they don't have is they don't share childcare. They don't do that. They're not superorganisms. They are really out for themselves at the end of the day. There's alliances. There's dominance. The dominant alphas will take what they want. And we don't. We have those things that are shaping us we're 98% chimpanzee, right? But there is this fundamental difference where we really are connected to one another in a fundamentally deeper way, more like ants and honeybees. And we do have that kind of structure. So you can see like some of these pictures are insects, social insects, and some of them are humans, but they have that same kind of signature of designed intelligence. I mean, if you were a Martian and you came here, you might think the ants and the humans are similar in some way. But then you also look at like, we're just not very good at it. Like here's these leaf cutter ants. I mean, they do like 10 million individuals working in these things, but they're not stopped in traffic. They're not like complaining about the Pacific garbage patch or anything like that. So, and yet we have this same behavioral ecology. This is all within our nature. So like here you see these termite mounds in Namibia, and they require zero fossil fuels to keep these mounds within 1 degree Celsius all year long. This is a really dramatic area with very large temperature swings. And then here you look at our cities, and it's 20% of the world's energy to do that. So we know that we have this capacity in us just by virtue of the fact that it evolved, and yet we've gotten down this rabbit hole. Looking at superorganisms, this is a slime mold, and technically, you know, a biologist wouldn't call that a superorganism, but I do because I define it a little differently. But so what they're doing is these things are going out individually, and they're looking for things, and when one finds one, they make signals that draw others to them. So we are adaptable, open-ended, opportunistic. We have the best of both worlds. We can go and explore and find things that we don't know, but we can also do that very efficiently once we find it. So here's a slime mold, and it's going out looking for these flakes of oats. And when it finds it, then it signals its teammates to come and do that. So it's both efficient, but it's also exploratory and open-ended. So those are these termite mounds, and how they get their environment richer and richer over each generation, because they're going out at night of these little termites, and they're collecting this bits of grass and things that aren't worth very much to anyone else. And they're taking it down into the nest and chewing it up and feeding these fungal gardens, which upcycle that value. And then in that process, you know, the termites live on that, but it also regenerates the entire environment, because it's enriching the soil, which is enriching the grass, which is drawing the herbivores, which are enriching the soil further. And that's drawing carnivores that are, you know, making carcasses that enrich the soil. It gets richer and richer and richer. This is a superorganism pattern. And if you're spend a lot of time out in the wild, you see that these superorganisms almost pattern the landscape. You know, they're at regular distances, and they are these fuel pumps almost for the landscape. And that, I think, is our role, our historical role that we evolved in. But these termite mounds, they're amazingly complex inside. And how are they doing it? It's these simple rules. It's just like sand and saliva that they're putting these pheromone signals into, and that's signaling to others to drop sand in certain places. And then there's trigger point thresholds. They shift the what exactly they're trying to do. Nobody's telling them what to do. It's all these little things, these feedback loops that generate these cascades. And you know, we're evolved to do that. So here's one example of these tandem running ants. They're little tiny things, and they live in acorns. It's really not a very stable habitat for them. So they have to go looking for homes all the time. So they're going out, and you know, they find something better, and so then they'll go recruit others, and it triggers the other to go explore and see if there's something better. And then they keep dragging or leading other individuals there. And at some point, there's enough individuals there. It's like a quorum sensing thing, where they all go out, grab all the other ants, and bring them back. So, and that's kind of a pattern in superorganisms, where these little tiny rules build in these ways, and then there's tipping points that really shift the whole behavioral pattern. This is one I really love for collective intelligence, and probably most of you are familiar with it, but it's this honeybee democracy of the way that these honeybees choose their homes. So when, you know, they need to find a new home, what they do is they all go out and they buzz on this branch and just kind of hang out and wait. But the scouts, who are the oldest females that know the area better and have more experience, and also if they die, it's easier on the colony. So they go out in all different directions, and they look for these home options. And they'll spend like 40 minutes investigating it, see if it can store enough honey, if it's dry, is it safe, all these things. Come back, and then they do these waggle-a dances. You can see that here. And so the waggle dance tells other bees, there's a spot, it's in that direction, it's that far, and it's that good, in my opinion. So they'll do this little dance, and other bees see that. And the more they like it, the more they do the dance, so the more bees see it. And so you get this, then they'll go out and investigate it because they won't accept it on hearsay. So you get all these different dances going on this waggle dance floor. And at some point, one hits a tipping point and the whole hive takes off. And they always choose the right one. It's amazing. So I was like, why don't we elect our presidents that way? but like, this is how they're making decisions, and it's very accurate. It uses collective intelligence because it is taking diverse and independent information from a variety of individuals, and then letting a kind of an honest competition of ideas take place. And then they do hit a consensus point in that way. So what I want you to do, this is going to start the breakouts. So I want you to think about a time when you've experienced genuine self-organizing collective intelligence. Not that it was imposed or incentivized, but where everybody there used collective intelligence to bring forth something that couldn't have been done if you were not working together. So anybody want to get started with that?
I can share.
Okay.
I think the best example I've had of this is doing volunteer work when we were actually doing some environmental restoration. Well, we were taking down fences, and it was a group of volunteers, and there was no hierarchy. We came in with the idea that the goal was just to take down the fence so that wildlife could run free and not get stuck in the fence. And it was awesome. It was just really easy to switch tasks when people got tired or they felt like they wanted to try something new. It's honestly the best example I've had in my entire career of teamwork.
Wow. It's
Yeah.
volunteers.
It's a group of volunteers, like with a shared, clear, inspirational cause.
Yep. Yeah. So what are the similarities there? One, they're not getting paid. They're doing it because they love it. Two, there's no hierarchy.
Yeah.
And three, they have a compelling purpose that they all share. So that's perfect. Interesting. We got another one.
Right, so 2 stories. The first one, set up exercise, and I think there was probably, I don't know, maybe 50 people or something like that. We, as a group, we had this, this fictional task to do. Part of it was, we got a little bit of information. We have a role, and we had some kind of information about, what we do, our functions, stuff like that. I think there was like a period where we would communicate with people, and then people would like talk to different people, and then you would start to match others up with each other. Anyway, it started out very disorganized, and that it ended up very organized. Like everyone was standing next to someone who they could partner with. I really wish I could find the guy who did that, because it was an awesome exercise. The other one, I did this working on a little exercise with a couple folks, and it was inspired by task switching in ants. And so what we did was we came up with like 5 rules for interacting and a goal. Our goal was to create a building design, and so we had simple tools. We had a whiteboard. We had like 5 different colored markers. Each marker went with a line type, 4 markers and an eraser. So each person could take a marker or the eraser and make a line. But after doing that, you had to switch colors. So red, you could make a solid line. Blue, you could make a dotted line. You could erase, and so anyway, these simple rules. So we did this in total silence in front of the class. And I think for a couple of minutes, everyone is just totally mystified. Well, what are these people doing? But after a few minutes, is drawing emerged, and it was not it wasn't one person's idea. It was like a group idea.
Well, I think that's interesting because the roles that you had different roles in that first one, and so that's an interesting phenomenon that superorganisms use. Again, the strong purpose is what brought them together. I love that you're saying that it was disorganized and chaotic, and then order emerged from that. But then the other one, the task switching, that's pretty cool. Again, the simple rules and the goal, but also I like how you were bringing in like a stigmergic arena,
Right.
because that's what like the termites have their termite mound, and the waggle dance floor. They create these stigmergic arenas where they're not telling each other what to do, but it's a central place where they're each individuals can see the system and go to work on it. Okay, good. So what do you think collective intelligence does? What does it achieve? What does it produce?
Creates a shift in identity.
Mm.
I think one of the things that holds people back from collective intelligence is that they identify as individuals rather than as part of a larger whole. And when you get the opportunity to say, oh, there really is something here for me, then it opens up things. So it connects feedback loops that are previously disconnected. So the system starts to see itself in new ways and begins to behave in new ways.
Yeah, and that's making me think too about how our information has to be, well, we have to share a language. Yeah.
That definitely helps.
So here's what I was thinking. Now, what does the collective intelligence accomplish? So it lets diverse individuals go to work on shared purpose in a distributed way with little direction, which is great. We're always trying to scale up, but nature kind of scales up by itself pretty effectively if you set the conditions right. Like other levels of complexity and collaboration emerge from this, things we couldn't do before. And that's superorganisms, there's things they can't do as individuals, and that this allows them to expand their capabilities. And then the decision making is accurate. The honeybees are finding new homes, but they're not spending a lot of energy like arguing over it. They're like, hey, this is what's available, this is what we found, and this one's better, we think this one's better, and it triggers. And it's very accurate. But this is from an old deck I had made, but I was thinking, these are bringing up some of the things that superorganisms are enabled to do through collective intelligence. So, they don't know what they don't know, what's out there. And that this allows them to discover new things. So it's indeterminate and open, opportunistic, and really potential oriented. At the same time, it's focused and efficient, because once they identify it, they can shift their strategy to gathering and production, and refinement. And so they can do both. So I think it allows unimpeded, self-organized helping and sharing among diverse, flexible individuals, right? And so that's like what we're after, because we, all of the finance and effort and that we put into management and telling people what to do, and it's like, what if we didn't have to do that? And what if that was more accurate and more effective and more flexible? That's what we're evolved to do. So for superorganisms, the structure is their strategy. They're not planning. They don't have org charts. That they don't have predictions and targets. The structure itself is their strategy, and that allows them to be ready for anything, and to shift strategies, and it's very effective. So chimpanzees, a little different, and I like to think about, if chimps were two-legged, they would starve to death because nobody would take care of them. But for us, when we get hurt, like, we take care of each other, and we think that is something that has to happen. That's morally indefensible. And then the other thing we see is that fairness and sharing are hardwired in us. There is a biological hardwiring in us that of superorganismness. We are not chimpanzees, even though 98% alike.
I just comment on that?
Yeah.
I've been reading Sand Talk, How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World, as well as The Dawn of Everything.
Mm-hmm.
And in both of those books, they point out that they found graves dating back 80,000 years that show people who were impaired, broken bones or crippled in some ways. And it was very clear that their community
Mm-hmm.
cared for them. It was not like, if you didn't, there was one thing in particular mentioned in Dawn of Everything, a form of dwarfism that would have, made this person pretty much unable to really participate. And the
Mm-hmm.
tribe cared for that person until like in their 40s when they died. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really long-term programming in our genes. This is not some,
Oh
we
yeah.
just became helpful in the last, couple thousand years. It goes back a really long way.
Really long time. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and we see like all kinds of healed bones. We see, I mean, just the fact that grandmothers evolved shows that we do take care of each other. Chimps really don't care.
And can I
Um,
ask a question about
yeah.
that? Just because I'm not super familiar with chimpanzees.
Yeah.
So I have read that they're the ones that will wage war against each other and all of that stuff. And I'm curious, like, I mean, there's a lot of behaviors that we do and practice
Yes.
in today. Okay.
Yes. And so, we're 98% chimps. I mean, that is like, we're 5 million years is nothing in
Mhm.
evolutionary time. So we're basically chimpanzees, or bonobos. I mean, those are our equal relatives. So we have those too. But they do understand fairness, but only in terms of how do I avoid getting beat up for
Oh,
violating it.
okay. So
They
we're
really, yeah. No, they really do not take care of each other in that way. Although they love each other and they care for each other, and when someone dies, they're grieving and all of that. But they don't have the same kind of. First off, they never share childcare. They would never do that.
oh,
Um,
wow.
and we do 50% of it. That's a fundamental difference. So yes, our lives are shaped by dominance. It's there in us.
Uh-huh.
But we have a lot of mechanisms for suppressing it. Like we smile at each other and politeness, and it's not polite to be dominant, openly dominant.
Right,
I
right.
mean, people do it if they can get away with it, right?
Yeah.
And then we have internalized, like for children, like if you show them a plate of cookies, like if this is a baby, like an 18-month-old baby, show them a plate of cookies, and then you split them unfairly for the two older children. The
Mhm.
baby looks at that like, what are you doing? We already know that's
Okay.
not, so it has moved over to a biological phenomenon.
Cool. Thank you so much for deep diving into that. That's phenomenal.
Oh yeah, that's what I like best. So let me ask, what quality of being does collective intelligence produce in a group?
I think empathy is the key driver.
Mm-hmm.
Compassion.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also it shifts from mind to heart, and we finally recognize that there are a larger neural network in the heart than there is in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Because most of our brain is outside ourselves; it's in others.
So I think that's the key driver. The other factor in the difference between us as a superorganism that we're not aware of is that we're gifted with free will. The consciousness perspective is group consciousness appears in all the other superorganisms, so they're all connected so critically. As we have the opportunity to separate ourselves, it's about how do we come back together. Going back to the original question, I came up with two thoughts that triggered me. Was as soon as I graduated architectural school, it goes, oh, what now? What, there's nothing out there unless you want to go get a job. But when I spoke to someone was interested in me, that was a beginning, and that was the beginning of some kind of feeling that now I could express myself in a way that I couldn't,
Mm.
but I couldn't do it alone.
Mm-hmm.
But as a group of new graduates, everybody's looking to do work. So collectively, we could get together, and the
Mhm.
inspiration to get something out accounted for getting the creativity out there. And it wasn't about the money. It was
Mm.
about, there was this place to be creative. And those were you can collectively come together, and there was no directive. Everybody had the same level of creativity. So they knew, oh, I'll take care of this, I'll do that. And it
Mhm.
came together as a finished product. It's just when you get further into economic structures that are brain mind,
Yeah.
that's when things start to fall apart.
Yeah.
That was one. And then what Erica mentioned earlier about voluntary, I spent 18 years on a voluntary group within the context of the schools that my kids went to. And I was a member of the committee for a long time. And then for some reason, they appointed me, you take it over. And so now I was in a position of leadership, but really didn't want to have the leadership.
Mm.
So I kind of embraced everybody, and everybody came forward. "Oh, this is what I could do. This is what I could do." And collectively, a greater unfoldment happened. And that group is still happening after I
Mm.
left.
Mm-hmm.
So that continues. So there's that, those two experiences were inspiring. They
Mm-hmm.
weren't the second one had no money attached to it. The first one, creative, building up a business has money attached to it. And
Mm-hmm.
the outcomes and the negative outcomes that come with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see. I mean, in these situations when collective intelligence really works, you have this sensation of other people have your back, and this greater inevitability that, you're not alone in it, and that it matters. It's driven by purpose. So, and everybody cares. So like, it's not the same as a job where I just going because I get paid. It's because you love it. And so it has a different, and then of course trust emerges because you're on the same, you have the same purpose. But also I think it produces a quality of being, of like paying attention to each other, like you said, looking for each other's gifts. Like if we're all in this
Yeah.
together, like who has what I don't have, and how can I develop it in them? And so like we have this thing of we don't see each other because it doesn't have an effect on our lives. But in an intact community, you would be going, okay, who's that person's really good at this, we need to develop them to do that so that we have that. And I think that's one of the things that we're missing.
Yeah,
This
this is what I mean by our mind. Our mind is in our brain, and when I'm in a relationship with someone, I've sort of become more attuned to this. What I think of is I or me actually expands, and there are emotional components of that, and there are intellectual components of that. So it's like if I'm working with someone, I know what they can do. The more experience I have, the more I know what they can do and what I can rely on. There can be this extension of my own capacity.
Yeah.
Right?
Or like you're a
And there's
team,
and there,
and
yeah, and there's this feedback. I also know
Mhm.
what may be expected of me. So
Mhm.
it sort of creates this unique situation. There, in over the course of a lifetime, there's like this ocean of these unique situations, my
Mhm.
past experiences with other people.
Yeah, I mean, I think
So
of
that
like professional teams, and how, or even like in this picture, you've got some shared rules on what's basketball, and you're like, hey, let's do this, and those people are cool, and so you do it. And then like with a professional team, how crackerjack they are, like they know what everybody's skills are, and they're always aware of it. So I think it's like kind of a magical state when we get into that collective intelligence.
Yeah, it's like a sense of belonging and significance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It produces these intelligent, agile, resilient, innovative, flexible, adaptive teams that don't require any management. Every individual knows what they're supposed to do in that because they have awareness of the total system and the total purpose, and they know each other's strengths. And so they can do that. And then the other thing is that nobody's telling you what to do, and they don't make big bets. They make lots of small, imperfect decisions, and they constantly correct them. So if you have an idea, you just do it. And then the next day it comes along and they go, oh, we could do this a little better. And so it's this kind of thing. And it allows everyone to work with their own personality and talent and expertise and all of this. Now, obviously, we're not ants. So we're not doing this like the way the ants do it is this: the queen produces this pheromone and it gets distributed through the colony. And so everybody knows that they're a member of the team. And someone that doesn't smell like that is not on the team. And we got to remove them. We as humans, we use this neural circuitry for empathy and caring, which is really derived from the chimpanzees, this Machiavellian mind reading, of like, what are people going to do? What are they going to do? I want to know. And so, but we've repurposed that into building social capital and bigger things that we can do. So we have this sensation of cohesion and cooperation, and that we're not alone. And that allows us to do big things together. And that's why you see these like hornets and bees protecting their investment, because it's all the relationships in that place take a long time to grow, and they're worth a lot.
I have a quick comment and a quick question. This is
go ahead.
phenomenal, by the way.
Thanks.
So, I mean, I'm sitting here digesting everything, and it's what's coming up within me is that in the work that I do, where I'm working with like predominantly in the context of leadership, that there is a direct application into the way we lead that nature can teach us. It's not just like, hey, your biology is restored in nature, like, taking excerpt from like The Nature Fix by Florence Williams, right? But it's actually like we're genetically tuned to actually lead so that we actually bring up the human potential of everyone.
That's right. Yeah.
That is so cool. And I had to say that out loud for me to get it.
Yeah. And at the end, I have a piece on leadership.
Okay.
Superorganism leadership and how they do it.
And I get, and just tell me if this is coming up, but like, I'm just curious, like, so if we are like what I would call it like below the line or reactive or command and control, but you could say that if you're like operating from the chimp side of our DNA, then we're like in that same mindset where it's scarcity, it's certainty, okay.
And I got some cool stuff on this.
Oh, that's just so cool.
We're getting there. We're working up to it.
Awesome.
Yeah. So what qualities are essential for collective intelligence to happen?
I'd say people need to feel safe, need to feel respected. They need to feel that if they take a risk, that it's going to be met with kindness and compassion rather than ridicule. It's okay to say you don't know. It's just things I've observed from, corporate America.
Yeah. So yes, psychological safety. And so, I mean, I put a few things that I was thinking there, like first off, you got to have diversity. Collective intelligence, you need a collective that is diverse, and you also need them to be independent. Like with the honeybees choosing their home, they're all going out, the scouts are going out in different directions. They don't just take someone's word for it. Like, hey, that was an awesome place. Okay, we'll go there. They don't. They have to see it themselves, and that's important. It's and that's how the amplification and dampening occur. So they have to have those diverse and independent contributions. They need a shared purpose. They have to equitably share their costs and benefits. Otherwise, they just, selection would take them out. And they have to trust in that reciprocity and that their teammates are showing up, that they're not parasitic. And then they need that transparent communication. So those are the things that came to my mind for that.
I know you're a fan of Bob Johansson. Would you also throw
Yes.
clarity in there? Because he talks about
Um,
clarity versus certainty a lot, if you're really clear on
Yes.
what you want.
Yes, well, I sort of think of that as shared purpose,
Mhm.
the clarity of that. But yes, I mean, there's obviously in people, there's a lot of that. He's good. Johansson. Okay.
I just, there's a thing that's
Yeah.
the notion of all of this topic, and if we apply it to parents and children, the kids come in, we have no idea where they're going to end up,
Hmm.
but we're responsible for them, nurture them, and then they have their path. Either they choose it or parents enforce it as to what they should be doing. And so how do we adapt the principles of what we're talking about in a collective, that in that small family structure, that could be addressed in a similar way? Giving the kids the freedom for their creativity and to express themselves, and not
Oh,
have parental roles that shut them down or prevent them from expressing themselves. So I think that's kind of like the early stages of how we can have human community that functions appropriately.
yeah. I mean, I at the end, I've got a piece on what would it take,
Yeah.
and it does come down to even like your very formative years of what you expect, the gentleness in your surroundings. Yeah. So if you don't have diversity, what happens?
You get the state of the world.
Uh-huh,
A bunch of old white guys running everything, and it just goes to hell.
There's
And
no
why are there only white
resilience.
guys?
But also, I mean, like in other organisms too.
Yeah.
If they don't have diversity, they dwindle because they don't
They
have
die
the
off.
options, the possibilities.
You don't get conflict. I mean, you do get conflict because you don't have that difference in exchange that arises from it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of static, isn't it?
right?
Not a lot of change. I mean, in evolution, diversity is the raw feedstock of change. Because evolution can't just make something up. I mean, there's mutations, but usually they're harmful. So it has to, cultivate a reservoir of possibilities so that it has that ability to shift and handle different kind of changes. So if you don't have diversity, it's kind of a recipe for extinction. And what prevents it in humans?
What prevents diversity? Oh,
Yeah.
Like scarcity mindset is how I would have worded it. I don't want to let go of what I own. And so I don't want to invite anybody else in because they might take something from me.
Scarcity. Sure.
Capitalism.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not. It is funny, but it's very much true. In a capitalistic society based on scarcity, which Alberto Maturana says, in biology, everything changes around that which is conserved, and we are conserving paper money by converting old growth forests into paper, which is useless in terms of a life support system. But so that's actually not just preventing diversity; it's actually destroying it.
We're doing this right now in the way we're condemning what's going on through sanctions, which is all monetary. So the whole notion of our relationship to nature, if we pluck out a piece of nature, it affects the entire ecosystem. So by us actually doing this to someone else, we're undoing our own system at the same time. And that hasn't been computed yet, because we think, oh, it's only going to happen to them, but it's not going to affect us. And it
Yeah.
actually is affecting us at the same time.
Yeah.
So that connection hasn't been, I will say this, that the overall perspective of what is happening is somebody gave a war and nobody came.
Yeah. I love that.
That's the perspective that isn't being spoken about, because that's huge in a humanity
is.
shift.
It's
And I think if we explore that and make that the conversation, that's a big aha moment, that you
Mhm,
can't continue to do that. Neither can anyone else.
mhm, mhm.
So
Here we go.
does that happen among the chimps? Those guys are warring over there. We're not going to go there.
Well, yeah, they're genocidal. You know, they form these warring parties of males that control the borders.
Hmm.
So yeah, they're not keen on diversity. What they're not superorganisms. They don't care. They just want enough genetic diversity to keep going, but they don't have that other piece. But you know, like I was thinking, okay, we oversimplify things. We're doing generic, like you were saying, like everything is about scale up. And so it's basically about removing all the noise and variation and diversity so that we can just scale it up without management. But what the beauty of collective intelligence is it allows you to scale up without that, because everybody takes on their piece themselves. So I thought that was interesting. And then this idea of this particulate flows, like we have very little idea of, you know, in reality, evolution occurs. These populations are full of diverse individuals, and some work and some don't. And the population shifts, and then things change, they shift this way. You know, so it's a population of possibilities, but we have this idea of these fixed categories that don't change. And so I think that's important to get people to understanding that the way that evolution is actually occurring is these particulate flows and shifts in patterns, relationships. The other thing, we monocrop, we standardize, and then just the unequal participation, like people don't feel psychologically safe to be there, or they just don't have a way to get there. They're not invited. So those things.
Yeah, in the world of design, I call this the 99% solution. And it's like, we want to sell the same product to everybody, right?
Uh-huh.
Like
Yeah.
you go to the grocery store to buy bread, and there's 100 brands of bread, but they're all the same thing. It's all white bread,
Uh-huh. Right.
probably made by the same, same outfit, right? Basically,
Yeah.
just different brands.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
that's exactly how China grew. It's exactly the same premise. It's one product and everybody brands it.
Mhm.
Wow.
Interesting. So then what about independence, autonomy? What happens if you don't have that? No, that's like really important to humans, that we get to be ourselves and do things that we think matter, and choosing people that we like to work with. But what happens if you can't, which is pretty much the state of our work?
I mean, it's a depressing place.
Mhm.
It really, like, you feel it, like you're either going to have groupthink, or you're going to have low morale, not or, like, and low
And
morale. And you're not, like, I guess in the balcony view, like, you're really not going to be getting the most, you're not going to be getting the most impact at all.
because people are disengaged. They're like, well,
Yeah.
why should I even bother? Like,
Yeah.
And what's, it doesn't have meaning to me. It's not meaningful to me.
I think over the last dozen years or so, Gallup's annual polls
Mhm.
consistently show that about 66 to 72% of the population is disengaged at work. That's in the US. Worldwide, it's
Right.
more like 85.
Yeah.
It's
And
huge.
2/3 of those just hate their job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
And there's
what a
who knows
waste.
how many are actively, sabotaging. So it's amazing things run as well as they do.
It is. And what a waste of potential. And when we need to do so much. Anyway, so what prevents that? And I think it's, it's control and it's conformity. Like we just have, and that's conformity has a lot to do with psychological safety, where
Yeah.
you're like, I guess everybody knows more than me and they belong and I don't, so I'm just going to copy them. And that's a super organism feature too, you know, that
Well, that's a perfect example of the fashion industry. You see acres of the same clothes and then everybody buying that and everybody wearing it. There's no
right.
separation of and no creativity until you get to the couture level where only one piece is made for that
Right.
one person.
And then if you talk to the like the high school students about what they're wearing and what they're buying, it's all fear-based. You know, like so and so got this and I'm not wearing that. I'm wearing the wrong thing and blah. So yeah.
I
Yeah,
was
go
just,
ahead.
if you get really scared about fashion, go to YouTube and look for how ripped jeans are made. You see these poor people working in sweatshops with they're just sanding off jeans, and all the particulate matter they're breathing it in is
my
destroying their
God.
Oh
lungs. I
God.
mean, this is how ripped jeans are made, and people pay big bucks for it, and they have no
They
idea the
do.
kinds of conditions it's in which it's being made. It's
Wow.
really disgusting.
And then what about you know, you got to have communication to have collective intelligence. So we got to actually connect and talk about it. And then what happens if you don't have that?
Silos.
Right. Yes. And
Major
what gets,
dysfunction.
yes,
People working at
total
cross
breakdown.
purposes. You know,
You're
A lot of
not
frustration.
advancing the system at all. Like there's no continuous improvement.
And of course, then that gets into transparency where like some people have the resources and information and others don't.
Yeah.
And that causes disengagement as well.
Erica, I'm really glad you said continuous improvement, because in the context of Tamsin's work on teaming, she talks about compounding infinite wealth on a finite planet. And I've always been bothered by this idea of continuous improvement in business, because it sounds like another stick to beat people with. You're not living up to continuous improvement. But if we substituted, are we actually compounding the wealth of this organization to allow us to move forward in a powerful way in the world? Then it's a very different take on continuous improvement, right?
Yeah.
So you just triggered that thought in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a biomimicry thing as well. As like we're always doing incremental stuff because we're tied to the status quo already. Like it's already, the question is, how could we do X more efficiently? So we still do X instead of going, what could we do?
Yeah. In terms of industrial progress, we're always on the cutting edge of antiquity. Because
That's right.
they know within the context of the organization, they are actually decades ahead of where we are now, but they're putting out what they have now in order to keep the money coming in.
Yeah, that's true. We're always
So
jumping on.
that's a very, very different model of innovation. Is like, let's keep it into the future so that we could continue to sell the mediocrity now.
Yes. So, I mean, these are some of the things that came up for me. If you don't have the communication, you know, you don't have the idea flow. It's all parts and silos, like you said, Erica. And just a lack of awareness. We can't even be on the same page and take on different jobs because we don't even know what we're working on and who's done what. And then, of course, I think a lack of belonging, lack of the same language, whatever that means. And just a failure to even see what we can offer each other. I think it's basically a failure to find a we, to know that there's a we. And then I think the main thing with collective intelligence is that shared purpose. And of course, like we don't necessarily have that at work. Our shared purpose is to make enough money to feed our families. And, you know, maybe we believe in the mission and that's great. And, you know, we do have shared purpose, but it's, you know, it may not be that connected to what we really believe or those kind of things. And so I don't think that collective intelligence can really take off without that.
It does change. Tragedy is the key to the portal of compassion. And when you look at tragedy, that's when everybody wakes up.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And is
Yes.
that a collective intelligence starts to flourish, and the agreement to get through this together.
Yeah. There's
But
a
then
certain amount of empathy and togetherness that happens before this even happens.
So then complacency is the key to the portal of tragedy. So we're in this cycle that can, it's like the circle cycle that you had in your, the arrows supporting each other. That's where humanity kind of lives in that same thing, tragedy and complacency.
Yeah.
Is constant. We're in that frequency, as opposed to how do we survive? Let's move it up a notch, and how do we thrive?
Yeah, it's almost like, how can we survive the system that we have instead of how do we change the system that we have?
Right.
Yeah, and then trust, and that's so hard because we just our superorganisms have been devastated. There is no we. You don't know who you're working with. You don't know where they're coming from. We just don't have it. And then the hierarchies, like, we don't know who's got our interests at heart and who's just trying to make a dollar off us. That's just the way it's structured. And so I want to ask, what does collective intelligence serve? Like, to what end do we do it? Do we want it?
Our continued survival.
In
mean,
one sense.
Not personal, but like our
like our human
species.
nature.
Yeah,
it's our human nature.
Yeah.
That's like, yeah, we're trying to be something we're not.
Well,
What else?
it's a bit of a tautology, but collective intelligence serves the collective. It's
Yes.
whatever you're part of. If you have collective intelligence in operation, it's there to serve and further the ends of the collective, hopefully in a life-affirming, life-supportive, life-nourishing way.
In fact, I almost think of it as a commons. It's something that we collectively share, like social capital, that we have to collectively tend and maintain, because it's what allows us to get everything done.
Yeah.
Earlier, you talked about, or you used the term signature. So, if you think about it, termites have this physiological signature that you can read in the landscape. Human beings also have that signature. And so our collective activities, at one level serve that signature, whatever it might be. Also, you can look at that at different scales, right? The scale of a home and a family, the scale of a town and a community, a state, and so on. And these are, convenient fictions that we create.
Very difficult to do the things that we do, because this is our human adaptation. This is the crux of our human adaptation, and we've kind of destroyed it. And so now I'm going to go back to superorganisms and say, what is it that prevents superorganisms from succeeding? And this is like different kinds of species. What are the things that stop superorganisms and make them unhealthy and unable to do the thing? If they share different purposes, and if they have different identities, if the communications break down, they're not a whole. But the main thing is parasitism. Superorganisms are always plagued by parasites because they collect such value. They're just like sitting ducks for juicy value. So wherever there's collaboration, there's going to be free riders. We know that. And we know that cheater strategies are successful until saturation occurs. And then everybody's going, there's a lot of cheaters around. We're going to be more careful. And then this escalating diversity of lock and key tests is what protects the superorganism. And the parasites are always trying to come in and game the test through deception. And the superorganisms are always trying to create better passwords to prevent that kind of a thing like that. So evolution has always been like this. It's an arms race. And actually, the parasitism drives innovation. It actually drives it. But it's cooperation that coalesces it into something new. So both of those things are happening all the time, but the parasites really are important. So what they do is, yeah, go ahead.
I want to ask you to go back to that slide for a second. I'd like to ask you to think about that metaphor of arms race. Is evolution really an arms race? Because that feels like a big projection of patriarchy onto evolution. Like,
it is an arms race because the parasites are always trying to get in. And so the organisms are always trying to create more protection mechanisms of, how are you, they don't want to be hijacked. They don't want to have their cells hijacked and their DNA hijacked. So that's always happening. And, where did sex come from? It's to beat this. And so, it's a constraint that drives new potential. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, I totally get it. It's just I'm bothered by arms race because that just feels like that's. I don't think of evolution as an arms race. I mean, that seems like a very particular Eurocentric way of looking at things, male dominated, and I think there might be a better metaphor that still captures what you're talking about without throwing it into arms race, which brings in this whole war thing. So just trying to,
Okay. Okay. Well,
If-
that's actually really interesting because a lot of the habitat I'm inhabiting is okay, I'm an evolutionary biologist. It's all competition, you struggle for survival, right? But then we know that that is happening, but the result of that is alliance and collaboration. And so to reconcile those kinds of constraints, life architects solutions that are collaborative. So it's these two forces that are going on that are actually creating complexity and magic.
Yeah.
And so the arms race has a very linear quality to it. And that is really not the case. So you're probably right. There's something I can say in there that is less linear in that way.
In the Web of Life, Fritjof Capra talks about how the new paradigm of sciences that's emerging is one that sees evolution as a cooperative dance rather than a competitive,
Exactly.
contest. And so
Exactly.
arms race evokes a competitive contest, whereas cooperative dance is very different. So
yes, but also, I mean, as a biologist, I've been bothered by this, that we have this narrative now of like evolution is cooperation, and it is. That's the architect of complexity, but it isn't driven by that. And so I actually do try to bring people back to this, is like, we cannot have this attitude of like it's all about cooperation and collaboration. So that's not what's going on. So I do try to pull that out and as this tension, but I do think arms race is maybe too linear.
So how about we do this, Ken and Tamsin? Arms race is the human diversity searching for hugs.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
That's really sweet.
Oh. Okay, I like that.
That'll
Okay,
change
so,
it.
yeah. So, but I kind of love parasites because they're so crafty. But like there's this spider that imitates the scent of the larvae, the ant larvae. So it just sits there pretending to be an ant larvae, and the ants come along and they go, "Oh, what are you doing out here? You need to be down in the nursery." So they just take them down there, and then they wake up and eat all the eggs. But,
what about the hornet that puts the egg in a caterpillar?
Right. That's right. I mean, parasitism is a driving force in evolutionary complexity. In that way, like it does. But what's cool is that they are gaming this system, and so that's a constant thing that superorganisms are trying to protect themselves from. And so what do we have? And chimpanzees are driven by dominance, kind of Machiavellian. But humans are fundamentally different. One of the things that we do is we blush. That was the only thing that Darwin could find that separates us. And it's because we imagine what other people are thinking about us. But that's a physiological response that chimpanzees do not have. So that's interesting to me. Like, and like I was saying about the plate of cookies, the fairness and sharing are hardwired into us. You would never know it if you have a 2-year-old, but they know. So and then the other thing is, when we look at existing hunter-gatherer societies, the most important thing to them is their personal freedom and equality and fairness. That's just really important to them, and they really work actively to prevent dominance. And even there's like the Ache in Paraguay, it's really important to them to kill anybody that is dominant. And they're like, the government tried to stop them from doing that. And they're like, but then our superorganisms will fall apart if we didn't do that. So that's interesting. So here, I think this is super, super juicy. So I have this basic pentad of the way that healthy superorganisms work. You know, they're collecting these particulate resources. Different individuals are doing different things. They're using their collective intelligence to find it. And then they partner with symbiotic organisms to upcycle that and break it down and return it to the territory. But now what happens when these parasites come in, which is always a problem for superorganisms? The first thing they do is take control of the host labor. So there's no more swarm creativity. They're not self-driven. They're doing what they're told through these mechanisms. So then these particulate raw resources that they gather, they just give them straight to the parasite. So the superorganism starts fading in health. I mean, they're really feeding the queen, this new parasitic queen that's coming. And then what happens is there's no need for collective intelligence because nobody's doing, nobody's self-directed. They're doing the bidding of the parasite. And then because of this, the waste starts accumulating. It doesn't get broken down and returned to the territory. So the whole territory suffers, the superorganism goes extinct, and the parasite moves on and hits up another colony. So to me, this looks very familiar. And so, for us, we've definitely been parasitized, you can see historically, like you're reading Dawn of Everything. And it's a pretty well-known trajectory that as private property increases, there's no more commons. And so, the resources are not, stewarded in the proper way. The quality of the land goes down, and then you have to colonize other communities to take things. That's been the pattern. So I think, to me, the question really is, how do we make our superorganisms, healthy again? How do we stop them from being parasitized? And,
Great question.
Yeah, and okay, so you can go back to this and you can look at this and go, okay, well, where's the leverage point on this? And that's up for debate. But what I think is that this collective intelligence needs to be activated. And if you can do that, you can disrupt this, and then you can reconnect these things. That's my thinking.
If we're talking at the level of humanity, I think one of the key leverage points is to stop dehumanizing. Right? Dehumanization is at the root of so many of our issues with each other, where we refuse to acknowledge the legitimacy of other people's their right to exist. And right. You're not as good as us. You're only 3/5 human, or whatever we're going to fill in for the blank in terms of that. So if we can simply start to see everybody as having legitimate right to exist and to have a decent quality of life, that begins to shift this whole thing. I think it's
and also
one leverage point. There's others, but that's the first one.
Right. But also, like, just our individuality and the gifts that we have. Like, I don't want to go to some job and be somebody's host labor. Like, I want to do what's really meaningful to my people. So so there's somewhere in between this collective intelligence and swarm creativity. Those are the places where we have leverage points, I think. And then that will hopefully heal these kind of things.
Well, another leverage point might be the fact that we're choking on our accumulated waste.
Yeah.
The whole planet's toxified right now. All right.
Yeah.
So
so we can go to work there too.
And it's also like happening on a micro level, like in our guts.
Mm-hmm.
Like the stuff
it's happening
at
every scale.
Yeah.
Right.
What does consuming microplastics do to your gut biome? How does that change your thinking? We know food changes thinking, right?
And then we're having like more research on the gut brain connection. So
Mhm. So I was thinking, how might we activate collective intelligence? And these are just some ideas that I had. That I'd love to hear your ideas.
can we share or should we?
Oh, please.
Okay. I'm like, oh, pick me.
I wasn't
Yes, the young lady with her hand up.
Ooh, 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 ooh. Yeah, go ahead. I like that.
Gosh, I like we're in the modern culture of work, our brain state is usually in this amplified beta. It's like do, get stuff done, da, 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 da. And it's like, for me, like activating collective intelligence, it's about like, how do we introduce moments in time where we can actually activate different types of brain waves, like that they're more amplified when we're not so consumed with the doing.
Mhm.
Like we're actually like taking time to go out and look up at the sky, or to be outdoors and or have a walk and talk conversation, or to find a sit spot and observe, or like, that's what's coming up for me. It's just like getting out of like the current hole that we're in of like the endless to-do list
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
that never ends.
Mhm.
I think the current unionization wave that's sweeping through Starbucks and Amazon is
Mm.
really a hopeful development, along with the Great Resignation. Who knew that the virus was going to have this profound effect on people saying, you know what, I can work from home. I don't have to go to the office. I'm not going back to the office. You make me go back to the office, I'll find a company that doesn't want me in the office, and there's an enormous sea change of mentality occurring out there
Yeah.
around work that is having some really profound implications they're just in the nascent stages of unfolding. I can't wait to see where it's going to be in a couple of years. But
Yeah.
I think a lot of this comes down to people saying, you know what, I'm not going to keep working what Graeber calls bullshit jobs.
Yeah.
It's just
I mean,
isn't working.
maybe the host labor is done.
Yeah, I mean, the host labor
Yeah.
may be actually at the point of not even realizing how they're self-organizing. I mean,
Yeah.
I just was reading an article yesterday about the unionization of Starbucks and Amazon, and this is not old school union organizing. This is coming from people who are in the millennials are
Yeah.
heading up a lot of this, and they're coming out of Occupy Wall Street, and the sense of we want to have a say in what's going on. Not we're here for collective bargaining power. It's like, if you don't give us this, we simply will not work, and
Yeah.
deal with it. Right? And
We want to be human again.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I see this as a huge movement towards collective intelligence.
Yeah.
I've gone back to my little exercise where we had a group of people and we agreed on some simple rules, a simple set of resources, and we just did it. It wasn't hard at all. It actually was kind of joyful. I think there's that dimension of seeking a sense of joyfulness in working together, seeking a sense of simplicity and collective responsibility. Yeah, and thinking back to that experience, it wasn't like, oh, we have to like create this, vision. We were just doing simple actions. And as we were doing that, something emerged. And having that, it was like waking up in the morning. It was just a very different experience from like working on an assembly line, going to the grocery store. You got, these are your choices, and you want A or B, and then you go
Right.
to the checkout, and it's a transaction, right? This was more relational. You're working
Yes.
in relation to the thing in your hand, responding with to what just happened. It's very sort of in the moment.
Yeah, and I feel like people do not get to experience that. Like I try to give these events, like when I'm in person, of self-organization and self-initiation and curiosity, like I call it organic design, where you're just following what's lighting you up. And people are always like, I never got to do that. And it's amazing. Like we did these hermitages we built, and we just, hey, we're going to do this. Come on. And people came, and then they're like, well, what do we do? And I'm like, whatever we need to do. Just get it, whatever's beckoning to you, pick up that tool and get to go. And they loved it. And so I came back, this is 5 years later, and all the people that helped came back, and they said that it was so special to them. And one of them had changed his career from that they'd never experienced collective intelligence around a purpose like that. Just I mean, our education system is like that, everything. I think we're just leaving so much potential on the table.
Yeah. Well stated.
Yeah. So does anyone have a time right now? Sorry, just been going on the wing here.
11:53.
Oh, that's pretty good, isn't it? But I did add some more questions that I haven't even spent time thinking about, but just about collective will, and what would it take to get collective intelligence reactivated in our lives?
When I think of collective will, as opposed to collective intelligence, shared understanding and shared purpose are a big aspect of evoking collective intelligence, but collective will is something a little different. That requires coordinating actions, and that's a different type of conversation that's not as easily had. I can create shared meaning with 1,000 people. Give me 1,000 people and the right platform. I will run a cafe that will give you collective intelligence of that. Coordinating the actions with 1,000 people is not going to work very well in that particular format. It's a really different thing. So that requires people working in much smaller groups aligned with the purpose of a larger group, but it's really difficult to coordinate across that many people. So I think that's where the Dunbar number comes in. You have to start going down to smaller bands and tribes.
Structure.
And then how it gets evoked, this is what I do. I design conversations to evoke collective intelligence.
Yeah.
So a few years ago, I was working for a mining company, and they're very male dominated. And so I developed something called the Tree of Gender, where we asked 4 questions. The first 2 questions were conceptual. The second 2 were personal. And everyone, men and women, all participated in this. And the first question is, what are the advantages of being a woman here in this company? And you'd be amazed at how many women wrote no. And they all had Post-its. You were asked to write 1 word or 1 short phrase per Post-it. And so on one part of the tree, we had the advantages of women, and it was none, very few, right? And then we asked, what are the advantages of being a man? And that generated hundreds, huge, filled out the tree, right? We said, then shift, what is your personal experience of being a woman in this company, and how does that sit with you? How do you get treated by men, right? And that generated a huge amount. And then men, what is your personal experience of being disadvantaged in this company? And got almost none. So this very imbalanced thing, right? And as soon as people saw that, they began a different conversation in the organization, because that had been revealed to them before. So again, connecting up feedback loops. There were men in these trainings who said, I had no idea. I'm going back and talking to my colleagues because I don't want my wife or daughter working here. This place sucks for women, right? So that 4 questions changed the culture with the right format, right?
God, that's incredible.
Yeah, that's amazing. I might have to do that one. That's a good one.
I have a quick question on something that that Ken just brought up. Like, you're right. Like, bringing in all this coordination with like 1,000 people is a lot. And I'm wondering, like, does this open up dialogue around, like, okay, should we be building organizations that are more than the Dunbar number, or like more than 1,000 people? Like, should we even be doing that? Like, should we be doing the Amazons and the Starbucks and the da-da-das of the world?
Right. Well, I mean, how does life work? Cells are a certain size, you're not one big blob, you're a bunch of cells. And how are populations? They're a bunch of little populations connected. And
Yeah.
so nothing works that way. And so here we are talking about climate change. It's like we have no mechanism for adapting at a global scale. How do we even do
Right.
that?
Yeah.
And so taking it down to the Dunbar number, and the networks that are human sized, that can rely on trust and shared identity and local needs. I think that's what's got to happen. So that's why I say it's really a structural and a process problem, because I really think that we
Mhm.
have everything we need. It's the problem is that our will and ideas get diluted by this vast blob, this global blob. It just gets diluted away. No change can happen.
Everybody
Thank you.
understands that humans were gifted with free will. So if I ask the question, if you have free will, what do you will?
Mm.
And see what comes back. Because
Mm.
then you get an answer coming from their own beingness
Mhm.
about what it is that they want, instead of interacting with everybody else. Where does it come back to the person, the actual individual?
Yeah, because I feel like we're all just kind of compromising to that. Like, oh, I care about this. I feel strongly about that. So I guess I have some skills over here. So I guess I'll go into that kind of career. But like, when are you ever asked, like, what can you do about the thing you care about? You were never given that opportunity. And so many wasted gifts.
I have
Yeah.
a dream that one day job descriptions will not exist. And it's just like, hey, we're hiring into this collective purpose. What do you like to do? I'm like, I like to garden. I like to surf. I like to. You're hired. Great. And then
Yeah.
like one day you'll work on something, and maybe another week, another thing, or,
Well, I have a dream that work will one day be people come up with ideas and they propose them, and then other people join on and they get upvoted and voted up and down, and budgets get assigned to them, and we just do that, and then we get paid based on that.
I love that.
Well, Erica, in
Like-
regards to your dream, I know of a company already that has limited job descriptions. And instead, what they do is they write impact statements. They say, we need somebody who can create the following impact.
Oh,
And by
gosh.
doing that, they cut their hiring process from 6 interviews down to 3. And they've promoted more people internally, and their job satisfaction has gone through the roof because people are no longer saddled with areas where they're really not able to fulfill the job description because it asks too much. Instead, it's like, here's the project, here's the impact, who can make this happen? And
I love that.
yeah,
That's
it's
great.
so that's already out there.
I think we are at the end of our time. This is a really nice discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have next week is really, or the 23rd is the next one. And this one's going to be really interesting because it goes, on the pentad, it's going to go from collective intelligence to swarm creativity. How do we take this collective intelligence and get activated on individual roles and go to work? But then that line, how does that feed the things that feed us? So it's going to be something really different. I'm going to do it art and nature in mythic time for all ages, and we all have fun together.
Cool.
And then hopefully we'll upload our creations, and it'll create something that will make a difference in the world. That'll have something we couldn't have done individually. That's
Very
fun.
cool.
So yeah, I would love to hear your feedback later. If you want to send me any thoughts, I welcome any conversation, and spread the word. We're going to do another round of this whole session, and then we're going to make it into a course.
Cool. Thank you.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you all.
Thank
Anything
you.
else?
Great to meet all of you, by the way.
Oh, you
Yes.
too, Erica.
Yeah.
Can't wait to hang 10 with you.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thanks
Bye
all.
bye.
Good to
Have a
see
great
Bye-bye.
weekend.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.